Greetings and salutations, this is Imperator Vespasian and his trusty sidekick.
Hello!
And today we're going to be doing an unboxing video of the Austrian Napoleonic Infantry 1806 to 1815. So we'll just pop the figures out of the box. These figures are from Victrix, obviously, and I'll just pop them out. And there's the box behind. On the back of the box you have a uniform guide of quite a few regiments of the Imperial Austrian Army, which is quite cool, and I love the fact that the colour of the box is pink. That's really cool. You never see pink things these days.
No.
But it's all very nice, and that's the box. So we have a little instruction guide on how to put figures together, which is quite cool. It covers 4 different boxes, so that's not bad. And then we'll go to the actual figures. So we have an officer on horseback, which is actually really useful, having an officer on horseback. Especially when you come to basing your figures up, you can actually base them up with the officer as part of the regiment, or it can be a separate command figure depending on what rules you're using. So you get 2 officers and foot officers, standard bearer and drummer, so that's useful. And then we go on to the actual infantry, which are well, in total there's how many infantry in the box?
28, no.
56.
56.
So that's 50 infantry.
2 regiments?
Yeah, you get a couple of regiments out of that. So all the sprues are the same. So we'll just go for this one first. So this is the basic infantry sprue. You get 4 figures which already have the musket in the air, which is very useful because you do get slightly annoyed sometimes when you have to put individual arms on and stuff, and if you're doing a huge amount of figures, which if you're doing Austrians you're going to be doing a huge amount of figures, it's very handy already having the figures done. It just makes it easier.
Yep.
So all you do is the heads and the backpacks. You've got the backpacks here, you've got a lot of different slight variations to the backpacks. You've got the bayonet and sword down the sides and bayonet and sword at the back, so it's really up to you what you do. Do you have options for a guy? Yes, you can have a guy shooting, which is kind of cool. You have a variety of heads. These figures are in shako. You can get another set of figures which are in helmet. The Austrian Army was technically issued all with helmets in 1806. However, most regiments didn't receive the helmet.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why is the box pink?
I don't know why the box is pink. It's the first thing I noticed about it. It's pink. I don't really know why. It's not particularly a colour of Austria, so it's probably because the other colours were already taken. So you get an option to have shooting people and weapon at arms loading, so that's quite cool. You can get quite a bit of variety out of this box then. If you mix the figures up a little bit, you could have 3 marching guys and 1 guy loading his gun, stuff like that, depending on how you base your figures. Some people base in 6s, some people base in 4s.
What are we basing?
4s.
4s, yeah.
So what I'd do is I'd have the stands that are going to be at the rear all marching, and the stands at the front with 2 marching men at the back, and the guys at the front loading and firing.
Yeah, because it has to look realistic.
Yeah, it'll give you like a firing line. So that would be quite good when we get down to doing that. Yeah, a few notes on the Austrian Army. The Austrian Army looks great on paper. It's huge. It's a massive army. Unfortunately, it wasn't the best army in the world. It was made up of regiments raised from local regions, typically. So your regiments came from a different post, a different part of the Austrian Empire. Your downside to that is you tended to mix people together who didn't really get along. See, it worked in China because the Chinese army was very efficient, and everyone in the Chinese army would be raised from a local region.
So basically, the Austrians had unwilling people wanted to fight, like the draft.
They were conscripted.
Like they were drafted into the army.
Yeah, so were the Chinese. But whereas with the Chinese, you have people from one geographical region. Oh, the British did the same. People from one region. The idea is you won't get people being cowards and running away because everyone in the village would know about it, and when you got home, you'd be ostracised.
What's that?
People wouldn't talk to you anymore.
Oh, like if you're a kamikaze pilot and you don't do your duty.
Yeah, if you felt
and you come back to your home, you get ignored.
You were shamed because you'd already died technically.
Because you brought shame to the family.
Yeah, so you were kind of shamed into fighting really well, because if you ran home, unfortunately, that only works if you're the same ethnic group of people, like the same cultural group of people. So if you come from a small town in France, then you're all going to be French, descended from the Franks or descended from the Saxons, whatever, Normans. If you're from a town in Britain in the period, you all Yorkshiremen or whatever, and so you would be ostracised. In the Austrian army, there were many different. There were 12 languages, I think, or 16 languages in total.
Wow.
There were so many different ethnic groups, and all of them hated each other. They didn't get along. The Austrian army had to speak English because it's the only language that all of the different groups could speak. So orders had to be given in English because it's the only thing they'll understand. So you're getting a group of people from the Balkan region, where some of them are Muslim, some of them are a different type of Muslim who don't like the other Muslims, some of them are Catholic, some of them are Protestants. They don't get along, and and also that ethnically they're just not related at all. They don't like each other because someone's grandfather did someone else's grandfather, and so you have these family feuds.
Like that now, is it? Okay,
yeah,
then.
And you have these family feuds going on, and then you put them all in one regiment and expect them to fight together as a cohesive unit. Now that works great when you're winning.
Who was it who thought that to get the worst enemy with the worst enemy and try and circle around an enemy?
It was the British.
And both sides clashed into each other and killed each other.
Yeah, it was. That was in Africa in World War One. The British Army couldn't keep Sikhs and Hindus together.
That's it. Yeah.
Was it Sikhs and Hindus?
Yeah, I think it was.
Or the Muslims and.
No, it was Muslims and Sikhs, weren't it?
Was it Muslims and Sikhs? They couldn't keep because the part of the British Empire you had all these different groups together, and some of them didn't get along. So you had to keep them at opposite ends of the battlefield, or opposite parts of the war. So you just kept them apart, and you just stopped trouble. And there was a particular battle where the legion edges of the army were trying to surround von Vorbeck's troops, who were these 3,000 African dudes fighting for the Germans, and they tried to surround them, and instead of surrounding them, they shot each other because they didn't like each other. So it's because of these feuds that had gone on for hundreds of years in their own villages. They just so the Germans escaped.
A whole new level.
Yeah, and then the British Army had to go in and try to sort it out, and the Germans escaped. So this is a complete failure. But these things happen, and especially in the Austrian army, you have groups of people who detest each other. They're just part of the Austrian army, but they hate the other guys. And you get the same in Britain today. There's just certain regions you don't want to mix together because they just don't get along very much. And it wasn't so much of a problem for other armies because, as I said, if you're in the French army, you're French, so you have you all have something in common. You're all Catholics, and you all have that in common. You're all born in France. You're all born in the local area. You all go to the same harvest festivals. If you're born in Britain, you have mostly a lot in common, although there is a bit of to-ing and fro-ing. If you're born modern day in Britain, then it's even worse. Imagine a regiment raised from where we are.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese would be fine with everybody. The British would kind of be fine on their own, and then you've got the Pakistani community, who no one likes, and imagine them on the battlefield together. The regiment would just fall apart as soon as you tried to use it, because it just wouldn't work. Same problem with the Austrian Army, big problem. On the flip side, the Austrian Army was actually quite well organised. And if you're winning, as I was saying before, if you're winning, those ethnic differences and those cultural differences don't matter, because you're part of the empire. So while you're winning, it's great, because those differences don't matter, because you're beating the French or you're beating the Russians. You're winning.
They'll have a common enemy.
Yeah. When you're losing, you pick on the lowest denominator, you pick on the smallest ethnic group you don't like, and then they pick on you, and then the army tends to fall apart, which is what happened to the Austrian army in the First World War. It's basically the same army you see here.
Sore losers.
No, the army just collapsed. The army just fell apart. Parts of the army were in civil war against the government in the First World War. In fact, the Germans actually contemplated annexing Austria in 1918, because Austria was such a basket of frogs that the Germans just couldn't cope with them being their ally. The term shackled to a corpse comes from that, which is what I use for my blog. The Germans actually described themselves as, well, German general described Germany being shackled to a corpse, shackled to the Austrian Empire, which was basically an empire that was rotting from within. They had nothing in common. So obviously, as Napoleon won battles against the poor old Austrians, these differences began to make themselves seen. Parts of the Austrian Empire tried to break away. Walloon did. Walloon actually became a separate entity, which was eventually absorbed. And the training area for Walloon was moved to Galicia, meaning the troops who were still loyal to the Austrians, who were Walloons, now found themselves, which is an area near Belgium. So suddenly you had all these sort of Slavic-speaking peoples coming into the Walloon regiments, and the Walloon troops who spoke whatever the Belgians speak, Dutch, not Dutch, Dutch.
Yeah.
They speak Dutch, don't they? Yeah. Who spoke Dutch had absolutely nothing in common with the new recruits who were coming into the regiment. They couldn't even speak the same language, let alone have anything in common between each other. And they just helped, as Austria began to lose territory and began to lose recruiting grounds and moved recruiting grounds to other areas of the Austrian Empire, it became worse. And the regiments just couldn't function because the companies between them just had nothing. They just wouldn't work together. A lot of it down to mistranslations. And the Austrian Empire basically fell apart.
Like every empire.
Well, the same happened to the Romans.
Yeah.
Vast empire with huge... there's basically these are things that happen. The Romans they had a lingua franca which was taken for granted, which was Greek. So everyone spoke Greek. But in the ancient world, everyone spoke Greek anyway. The Celts spoke Greek, the Britons spoke Greek, the Germans spoke whatever language the Germans spoke at the time, Norse, I would assume. So that they had nothing in common with the Romans, and so never really became part of the Roman Empire because they had nothing in common to join the empire. Whereas with the Austrians, you were forced to join at gunpoint, basically. The Austrians annexed your province and said, you're now part of the Austrian Empire, and expected you to fight alongside. Yes. And these people had no interest in supporting the Austrian Empire that they saw as a bigger enemy than the French guys or the Russian guys they were at war with, or the German guys. You have large amounts of troops in Austria who were Germans. And they didn't want to be part of the Austrian Empire. They wanted to create a new German state, which they did in the 1860s eventually. But yeah, it's something that the Austrian army suffered from greatly, and the Russians got over that sort of problem. Russia is the same; it has this massive army made up of troops from all over the Russian Empire. You've got people coming from the borders of China to fight in the Russian army on the Western Front against the French, and you've got people coming who are basically Turks coming up to fight in the Russian army, and you've got people from Finland coming down who are basically Nordic blondes who have nothing in common, but they all have one thing in common, and that is they all consider themselves Russian. So you can have all these different groups, but they're Russian and they're fighting for Russia. It's a big difference. Whereas in Austria, you couldn't. No Austrian officer in his right mind would stand up, wave a flag, and say, "For the Austrian Empire," because the local people just didn't feel that allegiance to the Austrian Empire. Yeah, I mean, although the Austrian Empire, Austria itself was kind of left over from the Roman Empire and considered itself the heir to the Roman Empire, just like the Russians consider themselves they're the heir to the Roman Empire, and for some reason the French did too. They just don't have that amount of commonality.
And what people, it would have been the British.
Yeah, we had our problems. We had hundreds of years of killing each other to decide who would be in charge and who would not be part of Britain and who wouldn't be part of Britain. In the end, we solved it by marching into Scotland and burning it, which ended the civil wars, really. It wasn't until George, who marched his troops into Scotland? He got sick and tired of Scotland constantly invading Britain, and so he ended the problem by destroying the way that Scotland worked, the clan system. He destroyed the clan system by simply burning the clans, burning the farms. Not particularly pleasant, but what the Scots kept doing to the Brits wasn't particularly pleasant either, or the English rather. And also most of the southern Scots considered themselves English, not Scottish. So the lowland Scots were more loyal to Britain than they were more loyal to England, which is why we ended up with Britain as a nation that are made up of different ethnicities, the Scots and the British, Scots and the English and the Welsh and the Irish all came together to become one nation under one flag. And it kind of worked. We became an extremely rich country that built a huge empire. So, yeah. So that's the downside to the Austrian army. The good side to the Austrian army is the way it fought. They tended to fight in massive columns, 3 ranks deep columns, and they fought en masse. Dense formations. They didn't have loose formations. Austrians invented the concept of Jaegers, the concept of being a skirmish infantryman. And they came up with this idea of having skirmishers who were originally backwoodsmen, people who lived in the wilderness, and they were pretty good with a musket. And these were formed into their own battalions. And they became very efficient. Unfortunately, when anything becomes efficient, government gets involved. And by 1813, all of the skirmish units had been formed into mass regiments that were designed to fire in ranks. So even your skirmish infantry became bogged down in red tape and ended up not skirmishing anymore. They fought as a solid block. Also partly due to new recruits coming in, not having the training that the original forebears had. The Napoleonic Wars was pretty bloody. It was pretty nasty, and a lot of people died, and you had to fill the ranks. Next thing, question? You got no questions at all on the Austrians?
Just still wondering why the box is pink.
Get over it.
Can't.
It's a pink box. Get over it. Seriously, it's not important. So let's have a look at the officer. Right. For the officer, we appear to have the option of helmet and officer's hat. The officers used to wear a grey tunic. I don't see a grey tunic. No, that could be the grey tunic, yeah. Austrian officers often wore a grey tunic. That probably is actually what it is. So you paint the officers with in grey. You don't have to. It was standard issue, but as I said, there wasn't enough kit to go around anyway. The reason they chose this kit, this uniform you see here, was because it was the cheapest. Because before then the Austrians had quite a few different uniform types, and that was just the bog standard cheapest uniform they could get their hands on. And so they issued that to all the troops. But as I said, they never really had enough helmets to go around. So you do have the Austrian helmet there, which I think looks awesome. I love that helmet. And when we did Austrians before, I had on more in helmet because I just like the helmets. But this time we've gone for the hats. You got some nice swords as well. That's quite good. And yeah, so you got the officer on horseback. And then you have the foot command. I think I would have the officer
On horseback.
Yeah, obviously. I'd have him on horseback actually mixed in with the infantry
That would be cool.
as part of the command. I think that's what I'd do. The Austrian regiments were quite big as well, about 3,000 men in them. So
Jesus.
they're large units, very large units. Like the French, I think the average size of a French unit was about 800 men. So you imagine that an Austrian regiment was, what, four and a half times, 5 times bigger than a French unit, a French regiment.
And they're still struggling.
Yeah, but as I said, they fought in this mass dense formation, which is great because you can't charge it with cavalry because it's basically in a square. And
Yeah, basically, yeah.
yeah, and also it can absorb a huge amount of damage. You can shoot Austrians all day and they'll still be standing, or there'll still be some of them standing. They never really got round to, they used volley fire, which is where you fire by rank.
Yeah.
So they didn't fight in line, they fought in these huge columns. The British and the Bavarians, they use platoon firing, which is where you all target one platoon, which is a bit different. And I'll explain that when we do the British box, because we've had to get British. But yeah, so what they would basically do is just fire straight forwards. They wouldn't aim, they would just fire straight forwards into the clouds. And I've already explained how the French regiment worked. So you can imagine how the French regiment would saw blade its way through the Austrians. As even having that depth of troops, the Austrians couldn't really stand up to the French, and they didn't have a way of massing fire onto an individual French column because they just didn't have the training, they didn't have the officers. In fact, one of the worst things is, whereas in the French army, the British army, you had junior officers who came up through the ranks to an extent. Not so much the British army, but certainly you had your sergeants. In the Austrian army, the officers tended to be appointed from sort of the Academy of Vienna. So your officers weren't officers who had anything in common with the local soldiers and were often a different nationality.
Mm-hmm.
Now that works when you're part of an empire like the British Empire. It doesn't really work when you're part of the Austrian Empire, because the Austrian Empire is enforced by force, whereas the British had the carrot and stick approach. So you'd have some guy from the Punjab would be perfectly loyal to the British army, fighting against whoever we're fighting against at the time, with a British officer, and French whoever, with a British officer, and the British had the carrot and stick. They gave you shiny things. They built roads, they built schools, they gave you 3 meat meals a day. Which is what you wouldn't get in another army. And
we had a
and they paid you.
Austrian Empire.
Yeah, and the British paid you. British pay was particularly good, mainly because you had to buy your own kit. You weren't issued it. you had to buy your own boots, and you had so you were quite well paid. That officer from the Punjab is more likely to take orders from a British officer, because he sees the benefits in being part of the British Army. And you're part of the British Army, you're treated with respect. You're treated as a fellow soldier. In the Austrian Army, if you came from Serbia, or you were a Croat, you were treated as a slave, basically. You were very nastily. It wasn't a particularly nice place to live, which is why so much of it kept rebelling all the time. The Austrians were pretty arrogant in the way they tried to run the empire. And they weren't bad people, the Austrian government weren't bad, it's just that they were just stuck in their ways.
Yep.
But this is the Austrian Army, and it is a nice army. We're going to paint it up quite good. We're going to do a lot of weathering on it to make it look all dirty and scruffy. Because the Austrians,
how you do things.
the Austrians were marching through the mud, defending the empire.
He just wore the other guy's dead body's clothes.
Yeah, stealing the clothes of the dead was quite common.
It's cheaper.
Yeah, there was the Piedmontese. There was a battle where they went in with the bayonet and they beat people to death. And when the officer, this is one little battle, and a French officer asked them why they were doing that, and they said, "Oh, we don't want to get blood on the uniforms," because they wanted to get the uniforms off the French. This is when the French army was still wearing white. They wanted to get the uniforms and dye them so they could use them themselves. It was part of the Italian Civil War. That's quite gruesome and nasty, isn't it?
It's dodgy.
Yeah, it's people strangling soldiers to death instead of using a bayonet because they want to nick the kit. That's really stupid.
Quick, stab him! No.
No.
The tactic we use is we strangulate him to death, and then we get a free suit of clothes.
Yeah. That's basically what these guys were doing. Although it was probably a one-off instance of that happening.
No, it probably happened every single battle.
I never read about it. I never read about people doing things like that again. But that was what was a battle that happened. So,
just get the enemy lieutenant, chuck him to death.
Yeah. Personally, I prefer to be right at the back taking numbers.
Yeah.
I'd be a pen pusher at the back, or quill pusher. I'd have a quill in my hand, and I'd be taking names. So I'd do, make sure everyone arrived to the battle and everything. Maybe hand flags out or something, or whatever you do when you're at the back. So this is the glorious Austrian army. Nice figures. Not very high detail. There's detail on it, a lot of detail, but it is quite sort of low detail. It won't be very good to dry brush them unless you're really fine when you do it, and it would get really annoying doing 56 figures like that. I prefer figures with much more sort of embossed detail on, but the kit and everything has that. The kit is horsehair. They used to have a white cover all over the top, but I think I'll just paint these in horsehair. And the bedroll was grey or tan, so it's really up to you how you do them. A lot of stuff like bedrolls and kit were not made in the main. There wasn't a main place to make them. They were usually sourced locally. So wherever your recruitment office was, if it was in somewhere in Galicia, whatever. Then whatever you had locally would be what would be sourced. So you could end up with different colours and different colours that don't match. But research the regiments you want to do. There is a quite useful regiment guide on the back here. It's also got a bit of the history as well if you're interested. And so source your regiment and then look into the history of it. Find out where the headquarters was based. Find out what local materials are made in that period. Wikipedia exists. So just source the information and then you can do your regiments authentically. We're going to be doing these as Germans to start with. So that'll be sourced in Germany, so probably a lot more blue.
Not pink.
Not pink. I still don't know the pink. Andrew, please, if anyone knows
No,
why
I'm
it's
talking
pink.
about this.
Yeah.
11th.
Oh no. I think the 11th was Italia, wasn't it?
Pink.
No, I know, but the parts of Italy were in the Austrian Empire. The Austrian Empire was huge. There were bits of Germany in the Austrian Empire. There were bits of Russia in the Austrian Empire. There were bits of Poland in the Austrian Empire. There were bits of most of the Balkans was in the Austrian Empire. Ukraine, massive amounts of Ukrainians in the Austrian Empire. Let's have a look. Now Ukrainian. So you have a huge amount of colours. Although Ukrainians wear the helmet. I think.
Wasn't red the most expensive suit you could get? Completely red, like our army.
No. Red was chosen by our army because it was the cheapest. The British always buy the cheapest. We weren't into spending
the
money.
Austrians, that was really expensive.
They use white linen, so that's for their uniforms. The colours weren't separate cloth. They were dyed and stitched. So it was the same type of cloth. They didn't use a separate type of cloth. Whereas the French, at the beginning, the French used silk. So these would actually be a silk, and it would be part of the lining of the jacket. And when you turn the jacket back, that's when you see that colour, because that's the inside of the jacket that you can see. Same with the cuffs. The cuffs were actually turned over and buttoned. So that is actually the inside of the jacket, the colour of the inside of the jacket. But with the Austrians, they were actually stitched on. So they weren't actually technically part of the uniform. They were stitched onto the uniform. I'm not sure when they started doing that. So I'm not sure. Depending on what year you're doing it, you might want to look into it and see which type. But it doesn't matter in 28mm. It's not going to make any difference. But it is an interesting thing.
Yep.
Yeah. There we go then. So I think that's everything. We've more or less covered the box.
5 minutes of history.
Well, just talking about the Austrian Army. I do like the Austrian Army. It is cool. And these are going to be quite easy to paint. And they're also going to be easy to put together because they're already mostly assembled. So I find that very useful. And I also find the fact they add officers on horseback. I think that's going to be really good. Yeah, that's cool. So, anything to add?
No.
No. So, thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Did I cover that?
Yeah.
I forgot to mention, you've got the flags in here. They're pretty generic flags, issued on different years. These are the earlier flags, and these are the later flags. Typically, you can use these any period because there's very little difference between them. The crest is smaller, that's about it. If we get the and that's the assembly guide, which tells you what everything is. Pretty straightforward. Oh, I mentioned the light infantry before. There's a light infantry hat there. So it's really up to you how you do the box. You will know what you're doing already. I'm teaching the. I'm probably teaching the well initiated already. So you know what you're doing with your figures. I would recommend the box. I think it's a really nice box, and you get 56 figures in, which is enough to do, as you said, 2 regiments.
Yeah.
Which is good. Although there will be large regiments. So yeah. So pretty big regiments, and yeah, we will box. We will let you know how the project goes. We're also going to be stocking these, so if you scroll down to our eBay shop, just click on that. We'll have these in our eBay shop as well, because when I get stuff from me, I tend to get a load of them, and then it's just easier ordering them, that's all. So yeah, these figures are really cool, and it's going to be nice painting them. All those white soldiers in white uniforms,
yeah,
as opposed to dull blue French. Yeah. So thank you very much for watching. You do the outro.
So if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and comment down below what you think of the Austrian Army. That's everything from me.
And that's everything from him. Goodbye.